Yeah, why don't you kill the lights? Okay, good. Oh, well, thank you all for coming. And this is, as you see on the schedule, this is the first of 6 classes on fathers and sons in Western art.
Excuse me, Harry. Cell phones?
Cell phones.
Please?
Cell phones. Thank you.
Sorry.
And there, I'm sure, are at least six others that I could use. I picked these 6 because they present sort of a continuum up to the present day, as far as the last one is concerned, the Wyeth family. I also wanted to include, I'm including one, the Renoir family. Jean Renoir is not a painter as much as he is a movie maker, a director, and I wanted to put him in there because he's so interesting, and makes a very interesting composition with his father too. So most of them are pretty much fathers and sons. There are a few uncles mixed in, a couple of daughters who I will have something to say about. It's hard to say who's the more prominent of these 6 different pairs of artists, and you can judge as we go along here. I think in this case, the son, Hans Holbein the younger, is more recognized, possibly because he paints, and I'll show these pictures at the end of the class, of the English court scene of Henry VIII, and it's a very he gives us a wonderful record of these different members of the court and Henry's different wives. But let's go back to the elder, who is very prominent in his own right. Hans Holbein the elder would have been a figure even if his son hadn't been quite so distinguished. He's a painter. Hans Holbein the elder is a painter. He's a designer of woodcuts. He does glass paintings. He does goldsmith's work. He does sculpture. He was probably born in Augsburg, which is in southern Germany in Bavaria. And I put down 1460, but, oh dear. It says low battery, Ed. Oh God, well, this may flip off at some point, but we'll continue. I didn't bring up my cord.
Keep going.
Okay. We'll hope it lasts. They worked together on various projects. As the father got older, his life got a little more turbulent, and he sort of disappears. We're not quite sure exactly when or where, but he was obviously at that point totally superseded by his son. You want to plug that in?
Yeah.
It says here low battery, that's all. Okay. So here are his 2 sons. On the right is the portrait of the elder Holbein, his 2 sons, Ambrose and Hans. Hans is obviously the more distinguished right here of the 2. Ambrose is a painter who disappears, but he was also inherited this part of his family's lineage here. And I wanted to show you this picture down in here of where they're from. Augsburg is way down in southern part of Bavaria, right in here. It's very influenced by the Italian Renaissance, and that would say a lot about the reason that younger Holbein goes the way he does. He belongs to a very celebrated family. The artist's attention to detail, this is the elder, we're talking about the elder for the first few slides. Attention to detail, and in the late Gothic style, and the Italian Renaissance, he introduces a new level of realism and detail to German art and German portraiture, developing innovative techniques. This is the elder now, in drawing and in design. He does altarpieces. He does a lot of church work until the Reformation comes along, at which point both of them have to seek different kinds of work. But the notice on this over here, here's the father standing behind his sons, proudly behind his sons, Ambrose and Hans right there. and he's putting his hand on Hans's head, because that's, even at that age, I can't really tell how old he is, that's he's clearly the one who's gonna continue the family tradition of being a great painter. So he bridges this gap between the Gothic style and the Italian Renaissance. On the left is the earliest important work of Holbein, Madonna and Child in 1492. And then on the right, and maybe you can see some ways in which the Madonna and Child, Virgin and Child has differed, changed right here. I don't know whether anybody can see. Anybody want to comment on anything? We get not. Do you see anything especially?
Left is flatter.
The left is flatter, yeah, definitely. It's not as realistic. I mean, this does not look as much like a baby as this one does over here. The background is different, more complex. It's not just thrown in there, but that's in the space of about 10 or 15 years. That's the change that we see the elder Holbein undergoing. They both positions look a little awkward still, and they're very similar in terms of the kinds of things that they're holding the child's hand. They're sitting on a cushion. Mary looks, hard to say. Mary looks somewhat more realistic on this side. There's a little vase down in here. So the elder Holbein is evolving as an artist as he grows older. But I want you to see that, certainly. His later paintings will show how Holbein has pioneers this transformation of German art from the late International Gothic to the Renaissance style. His attention to detail is evident in the folds of the clothing, as you can see here on the left. The left is the later version, and the older one is on the right. The expressions on the faces, you see a difference in those. We're only talking 10 years roughly difference, but the expressions on the left, I think, are a little more specific. The the position of the bodies, the way the drapery is on the bodies is different. This is certainly very realistic in terms of the art at the time. The International Gothic style emphasizes aristocratic elegance with elongated, graceful figures, rich colors, detailed ornamentation reflecting the chivalric court life. Now down here, we got a skull sitting down at the bottom. I don't see a skull over here. Okay, over there. Okay. But that shows the evolution again in the elder style. Here was another one. This is 1490s. Again, hard to date these specifically. Devotional panel depicting the scene of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, a subject that had been popular in Germany from the 14th century on. The Christ child seated between the Virgin and St. Anne seems quite independent, although perhaps somewhat precariously balanced as he reaches for the Virgin's prayer book with his right hand. It's a little bit awkward setting here, but again, they're trying out changes from the earlier Gothic style that was prevalent, particularly in Germany, and the influence of the Renaissance is creeping in. I should say that Holbein the Elder is probably closest to Dürer in terms of time frame. Not that their art is the same, but Albrecht Dürer is a German painter at that point who's about the same period of time.
Who is Saint Anne in Christian mythology?
Who is
Saint Anne in Christian?
Anybody? The question is, who is Saint Anne in Christian? Mary's mother.
Of Mary.
Mother of Mary.
Grandparents. She's wearing red, but the Virgin is, as usual, wearing blue.
Yeah. Holbein makes a number of portrait drawings that foreshadow the work of his famous son. He is not known as much as a portraitist as later, as his son will become later, but he does do portraits, and we'll see some in just a minute. The three figures are all seated on an elaborate golden throne. The figures with their thin, elegant bodies, large heads, and the sharp, well-defined folds of drapery look back to the late Gothic style. that characterizes the sculpture of a man named Gerhard. Gerhard refers to Nicholas Gerhard, a Dutch sculptor active in the mid-15th century and one of the most influential artists in the late Gothic period. So certainly Holbein is influenced by the men around him, and we see this in this particular picture. This is the dormitition, which is not a word I was familiar with, but this is what it's entitled. The falling asleep, actually the dying of Mary, as it's shown in this picture right here. There she is right here. Holbein the Elder is filled with small details of everyday life. This picture, it's considered one of his best works. The Virgin with her youthful appearance gently prepares for her death. She's shown as a middle-class woman of Augsburg. The apostles are gathered around her, are consistent with the actual life of her deathbed. St. Peter sprinkles her with holy water. Andrew swings incense. John puts a candle on her head. You can see that. The symbol of a peaceful death. The peacefulness of Jesus' mother's death, surrounded by reverent apostles, contrasts with Christ's suffering and the mockery of his tormentors. So this is
The dude at the foot of the bed is wearing eyeglasses.
yeah, well, I was going to point that out in the next picture. You'll see. The left, this is sort of little pieces of that last picture right there. And you can see the apostles are grouped around her, one wearing spectacles is reading from the Bible. I can't explain why they had spectacles, but why they put it on, he put it on the apostles. But maybe one of them was nearsighted, you can see right here. So there's two different little pieces, little fragments that shows this up close. Here is the reading spectacles right here. This is the whole picture. This is the reading of the spectacles, and this shows you the ascending into heaven right in here. And this, as she goes up, despite its monumental size, this large double-sided panel of the Dormitition is actually a fragment that was one of the wings of a folding triptych. The Dormitition of the Virgin was in part a large altarpiece, but its original configuration is not well known. The other associated panels would also have depicted scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary. So this is right here, this is not a small part, but a center part, and these are just little fragments showing in detail what the other one was about. This is considered his greatest work, actually, Saint Sebastian altarpiece. Does anybody know who Saint Sebastian was? Who was Saint Sebastian? Martyr?
The microphone's going?
Okay, sure. Saint Sebastian is a Roman soldier who becomes a Christian, and he's hounded for changing his belief. And of course, he becomes a Christian saint. But he was sentenced to be executed by being shot with bows and with arrows. Okay, sort of a gruesome way. He doesn't die. Apparently, at that time they brought him. He recovered. But this is the vision, at least, of Saint Sebastian being tortured at this point, and you see the various panels show this. The center is Saint Sebastian, tied to a tree, pierced by arrows, as is in most of his portraits. But this narrative painting is also surrounded by 6 archers and onlookers. And you can see they're using all sorts of different weapons as they aim at him. On the right panel is Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, who pours water from a ewer into the leper's bowl, while a leprous boy and a bearded man look on. To the left panel. The bearded man is Holbein himself. Wait a minute, now where is this? Right here. There's Holbein. That's a picture of Holbein. He's put himself into that picture. On the right, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary pours water, into the bowl. The bearded man is Holbein. No one would mistake the tree paintings for anything but products of the Renaissance. These are typical Renaissance paintings with deep backgrounds, linear perspective, carefully molded faces, and so on. Critics agree the elder Holbein was a pioneer and a leader in the transformation of German art. So this is a really outstanding work. It's it's not at the end of it, it's sort of in the middle of his career at this point in 1516. He and his brother Sigmund often painted together for a long time while they were relatively young men. We don't know quite for how long. Hans Holbein always signed his works. He gave his son Hans and his other son their first lessons, endowed them with virile force and an immense capacity for characterization. After his death, Hans the younger claimed his father's brushes and paints and sketchbooks from a monastery. So this was considered a real recognition of his father's greatness. Here's a portrait. He does portraits as he gets on after the Reformation, which begins in 1517. So 1518 through 20, these portraits have been the subject of debate with regard to dating and composition. The identity of the figures is not really known. We're not terribly sure. It's just a man and a woman is what I've been able to find. Art historians have generally assumed the portraits are a pair, probably, or possibly at least a man and his wife. So it shows that he's interested in, and these are realistic portraits. They're quite different, actually. They're depicted in different ways. The woman is in profile, the man in less than full profile. His body is slightly turned. It would be more unusual for them to be paired looking at each other directly if they were husband and wife, which is why there's the doubt. But this is an example of Holbein the Elder's ability to paint realistic portraits. I mean, he's really grown enormously as an artist at this point. The physical characteristics of both sides both men and women have rather pronounced features, and critics feel he's does a very accurate job. Okay, one other, the Annunciation of the Angel. This is in the 1490s. Now this shows Holbein, this picture shows Holbein's influence on his time, Holbein the Elder's influence. It was this, he does a sketch, a drawing here. The engraving was produced by Israel von Meckenem, 1445 to 1503, a little older man, prolific artist known for his prints and reproductions, using the word loosely, of other artists' work. And here we see the angel. This is a fragment down in here of an earlier work by von Meckenem. And here's the Annunciation over here as the angel is telling Mary that she's going to deliver Jesus. This image shows Mary kneeling in an intimate domestic interior, probably her bedroom, as she receives the news from the angel. And the fragment on the left is a little bit later work. Again, probably a more sensitive rendering of the angel's head right here and here. It may even have been done by Holbein, but I think most people agree that it's done by von Meckenem. Okay, now we're almost through with Holbein the Elder. The last years of his life, he was a citizen of Augsburg until 1516. That's the year before the Reformation begins, and Luther begins to rile things up. After which tax fraud forces him to move to Isenheim in Alsace, near the present-day French-German border. So he moved somewhere else to maybe escape his debtors. He's able to start a successful career, resume his career, but then his own brother tries to sue him. Soon the disgraced painter has to flee again, this time to Basel in present-day Switzerland, and he dies in 1524. Now, this is a picture of him as an older man. You saw a little bit of that in the St. Sebastian altarpiece that I showed you. So this is sort of his final years, and this is where move on. His sons become respected painters, as I said, and printmakers. But this is the last portrait that we have of the father. Okay, the younger, 1497 to 1543, so-called to distinguish him from his father. Relatively little is known of his private life and personality, but the steadfast, penetrating eyes of this self-portrait portray an uncompromising objectivity. I mean, he's a very serious, he's a totally committed painter. He's moving on from what his father does. At the time this is painted, Holbein is 45. A year later, he would die from the plague, which is certainly around at that point. He's a Swiss and German printmaker who is considered one of the great portraitists of his time. Okay, map of Europe in the early 1500s. And there's a picture of Martin Luther over there haranguing the multitude standing here. And look at how complex Germany is. I don't want to try to identify all these places. Switzerland is down here in red, and was a safe haven that you could retreat to if you were being prosecuted or persecuted. France over here is still a country, but Germany, this is the old Holy Roman Empire, sometimes up to 300 different states, city-states, principalities, dukedoms, all sorts of arrangements. And of course, Augsburg is somewhat up in here in this area, just north of the Swiss border. By the mid-1520s, life was becoming difficult for an artist in southern Germany or in Bâle. Zealous Protestant reformers removed paintings from churches and monasteries. So all these wonderful paintings that had been done during the Renaissance in Germany, especially, not so much in Italy, the Reformation doesn't spread down there yet, they are destroyed. No new church art is commissioned. Faced with unemployment, Holbein decides to go to England. That's a short explanation of why he goes to England. Switzerland also was riven by all sorts of strife in lots of different ways. So and most artists would try to leave, or they changed their whole style and went into portrait painting. He does paint some portraits. In this case, this is of a Swiss mayor. It's actually Mayor Jacob Mayer and his wife Dorothea, painted the year before the Reformation really breaks out. The portraitist Holbein follows Leonardo's dictum, "The mirror is our teacher," in recording 16th century men and women. The occasion for this portrait could be Mayer's election as the mayor of Bâle in the same year. Holbein was only 18 years old when he paints this, which is remarkable. He's arrived in Bâle. He was a member, he joins the Swiss Guard, he's a member of the Swiss mercenaries. He has to earn money, he's not married yet. And the French, Italian, and papal nobility, which was a lucrative business at the time, but he has to move on when he realizes that the religion is too much of an influence on the kind of art that he can paint. Here's the same man, Joseph Meyer. This is interesting. This is the Reformation is now well underway. Formerly mayor of Bâle and a wealthy banker, defies prescription against such pictures and asks Holbein to paint an altarpiece for his country estate. So he gets around it by this, and that's a picture of him right here with his wife. Holbein captures the intensity and piety of Meyer's face. He also adds a portrait of Meyer's first wife right here, seen in profile. Right here. There she is right there. His second wife, children below. When he returns to Bâle after his first stint in England, he alters the painting and repaints the daughter now in a wedding dress. So he painted the child when she was a child, and then when she gets older and is getting married. So he's adjusts to the son. He spends two different periods in England, two different times in England, and for reasons which I'll go into. Okay, now this is an important picture in terms of his career. You may have seen this, but it's by Holbein the Younger. His minute sense of observation is evident. His portrait of Erasmus portrays a Dutch humanist scholar as physically withdrawn from the world, sitting at his desk, engaged in his voluminous correspondence. His hands are sensitively rendered as is his carefully controlled profiles. And I'm sure you've seen this before. It's important for Holbein's career because Erasmus was so impressed with this portrait that he has copies made of it and sends it all over the place. You know, everybody, hey, look what they did of me. It's like sending your photograph around, but it's less easy to do it. And it goes to England, to the English court. Henry VIII sees it, and one thing leads to another, and he becomes the court painter for Henry VIII, which really brings him up to another level. By 1526, the severe iconoclastic riots and censorship of the press and against the Catholic Church swept over the city of Basel in the face of what, for the moment at least, amounted to a freezing of the arts. The Reformation had a very strong influence on the development of the arts at this point. Holbein leaves Basel for England in 1526. He goes for 2 years. So he's going to have 2 different periods there. Has a letter of introduction from Erasmus, who loved his portrait, after all, and we said that's how important it was. And he travels by way of the Netherlands to England. He's only 28 years old, and he would achieve remarkable success in England. His most impressive works were executed for the statesman and the author statesman Thomas More, which includes a magnificent single portrait of the artist, of the humanist. So this is the stepping stone that sort of brings him really to prominence. With a letter, you've seen this, letter of introduction from Erasmus, Holbein enters the rarefied circle of Thomas More, and he stays in it, as long as More is alive, anyway. He's soon living near him in Chelsea. Here, More is holding a book in a fur-lined coat of rich fabrics, black satin and red velvet. He's wearing his Tudor collar of livery chain with Tudor rose, a sign of fealty and high office. And you may have seen this movie a long time ago, A Man for All Seasons, the play. I mean, I can't remember who the actor was, but it was very, very, very good impression of it. More in a letter back to Erasmus has seen Holbein. He's met him, and he describes him as a wonderful artist. The painter's close observation extends to the tiny stubble of More's beard. You can see that or not. The incandescent glow of his velvet sleeves, and the abstract decorative effects of the golden chain. A cord in the upper right is tied in a loose Franciscan knot, a sign of More's spiritual convictions. He wears a wedding ring with an insert with a stone. So he's really captured More here beautifully. Holbein also completed a life-size group portrait of More's family, which work is now lost, although its appearance is preserved in copies in various museums. So I don't have a picture of the family, but that's Thomas More. This is Henry VIII as a early 30s young man. I'll show you one of them is a little older. He would spend 2 periods of his life in England, 1526 to 28 and 32 to 43, portraying the nobility of the Tudor court. And here's a young Henry VIII, aided by his ministers, Cardinal Wolsey, Thomas Wolsey, and Thomas Cromwell. Henry's reign was characterized by ambition abroad and ruthlessness at home, firmly establishing the Tudor family as the ruling dynasty in England. Henry was 17 when he succeeds his father, Henry VII, to the throne in 1509. And of course, he's well known because of his 6 marriages and other matters, executing Thomas More, executing Anne Boleyn. 6 feet tall, powerfully built, a tireless athlete, huntsman, and dancer, he promised England the joys of spring after a long winter of Henry VII's reign. So he lasts from 1491 to 1547. Henry's first marriage, soon after his accession, he marries Catherine of Aragon on the left, his brother's widow, and she's roughly 10 years older than he is. And then after 28 years, he finally marries Anne Boleyn. Some scholars attribute this sketch to Holbein here. It's hard to know who did that. It's not a formal painting. Here's Catherine of Aragon. And Henry's marriage lasted nearly to, Catherine of Aragon lasted for 23 years, 24 years, while the remaining 5 totaled less than 10 years of his remaining 5 wives. 5 of his children would die in infancy before Elizabeth was born. So it's not that Catherine of Aragon doesn't get pregnant, but all her children die, except finally Elizabeth lives. She is the most famous. Anne Boleyn is, of course, the most famous of them all. There's no conclusive proof that the sitter in the Windsor drawing is Anne, and yet the case favoring her, it's most likely it's probably her. Holbein's portrait style altered after he enters Henry's service. I mean, he now is focusing mainly portraits. He's not turning and doing church altarpieces or more religious figures. He focuses most intensely now on the sitter's face and clothing. He's perhaps best known for the paintings of the Tudor court. Here are Henry's last 4 wives, all done by Holbein. Okay, Jane Seymour, Anne Boleyn, we know he executes. He kills her for infidelity, apparently, but not really. This is Anne of Cleves, which has an interesting story. Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. And the saying goes, a rhyme for their fates is divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. So these are the last 4. The first one is Catherine of Aragon, who he divorces. Anne Boleyn, he beheads. And then he marries Anne of Cleves. When Holbein paints her portrait, you may have heard of this, he paints her portrait when Henry never even sees her before she comes to get married. And then Henry, after 6 months, decided he didn't like her looks, and so he divorces her. So she gets set aside. This woman right here, Catherine Howard, had an illegitimate child before she even got married. She was in her late teens. And then at that point, she apparently was having some sort of an affair with a courtier, and Henry discovers this and executes her, cuts off her head. And Catherine Parr outlives him. So divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, are the story of these six women. Henry's flat face and wary eyes, realistically, this is he's a little older, depict his unique character, while his magnificent apparel, embroidered with delicate and gold thread, it elaborates his regal authority. And this is here. I show you the codpiece piece because Henry insisted that this codpiece be put in there. I think you all know what a codpiece is, and in a large codpiece because he has so many children, so many wives. It's sort of a little bit of a questionable action, but Holbein knows which side his bread is buttered on. Holbein paints this in. That's what you want, Henry? Okay. The infamous monarch presented as an imposing, commanding, and virile in a moment when both his physical and political power is in decline. So he wants to appear much more virile and imposing than he is at this point. I haven't got a date for this picture. However, centering his analysis on this protuberant codpiece, the English king sort of is trying to appear much more imposing than he actually is in the mid-late 1540s. So that's Henry VIII. Okay, now some of his ministers here. Cardinal Wolsey. Again, these are all painted by Holbein. Notice the portrait here. Cardinal trying to make him out to be more of a religious figure than he really was. A butcher's son from Ipswich, who rose to become Henry's most powerful minister in the early part of his reign. By 1514, he's become the controlling figure in virtually all matters of state. He's the one who builds or reconstructs or enlarges Hampton Court, where some of you may have visited. very expensive, but sort of a rival to Buckingham Palace, where Henry is living at that point. Um, uh, his incessant diplomatic activities leave him little time for ecclesiastical concerns. He's really much more of a political figure than he is religious. Besides, he was very wealthy, he's unchaste, he has illegitimate children. After failing to negotiate an annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, Wolsey fell out of favor and is stripped of his government titles. In 1527, he's recalled to London to answer charges of treason. Henry commonly uses to make up these things against his ministers. He falls out of favor. He's condemned to death, but he dies of natural causes before he can be executed. Henry was apparently ready to cut off his head, but he dies before this could be carried out. So that's first minister. There's another minister who comes along, who's Thomas More, who we know dies before or is executed because he refuses to accept what Henry's break with the Catholic Church. Somebody's cell phone. Okay, let's move on. Now his next minister, also Thomas Cromwell by Holbein the Younger, about 1634. Cromwell is seen as an English lawyer and statesman who served as the chief minister to Henry from 1532 to 40. Here he is about 48 years old when this picture is painted again. Holbein captures the sort of the solemn, solitary mood of this man who acts in many ways like he's also a prime minister. He's a blacksmith's son. Question? Yeah.
Well, really not a question, but a comment. I think this is the first face where you really see an expression of how he's looking and feeling, much more than the other paintings that we've seen so far that he's just developing. And I just think this one shows wonderful expression.
Yeah, let us back up on this other one for a minute. Let's see. So you see, you think this picture of Wolsey is too sort of much of a stereotype. Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, so here's Cromwell, who's a blacksmith's son. He rises to prominence as an associate, the chief figure for Wolsey's actions at this point. After Wolsey's fall and a period of initial distrust by Henry, he becomes a confidant, assuming the roles of sort of vice consul, Lord Chancellor, Lord High Chamberlain, among others. He's a very shrewd politician. You can see his expression here, keeps his cards pretty close to his vest. He doesn't give away very much at this point. He was aware of the effect of propaganda and commissions Holbein to produce images positioning him as a reformist and as a royalist. So we see Holbein is really, at this point, at the mercy of the various figures who are commanding affairs in England. He engineers the king's divorce from Catherine of Aragon. He was an early ally of Anne Boleyn, but he plays a key role in her downfall. He arranges Henry's short-lived marriage to Anne of Cleves, which leads to his execution. So Holbein does not get blamed for Anne of Cleves coming in and being such a disaster. He didn't like her looks. It wasn't that she was such a disaster. But Cromwell falls because of this. And that's the main point about him. Here's Holbein. He does do some religious paintings in 1527, just before he leaves England. He does his picture of the Last Supper. Jesus and his disciples sit at a narrow covered table, everything squished together. Only 9 of the 12 apostles are present. The 3 missing figures possibly would have been shown on the edges of the picture, but it was much more compressed painting. They were lost when the panels were attacked by iconoclastic riots in the Reformation. So I'm sorry. So this would have been done when Holbein is back in Basel. possibly done by, in a workshop, Christ is just spoken. But typically for Holbein, he does not adhere slavishly to Leonardo's original. He alters the gestures and postures of the disciples, also their faces. In addition, the eye is not led directly through the window openings to a distant landscape. Holbein encloses the shallow pictorial space with an intense blue sky that looks completely ethereal. The picture format is also more compact than Leonardo's, requiring a much more compressed arrangement of the figures. So he does do religious figures, but not religious portraits, but not as much once he gets to England. Okay, now back to the portraits in England. This is Edward VI, who is the only child of Jane Seymour, the only male of Henry produces at all. He has Elizabeth, who's 12 years or so older than Edward, but because he's a boy, he will get the crown. The baby prince looks more mature on the left here than II, and he echoes the regal authority of his father. Edward, over at age 5, is also shown in a miniature version of his father in the same full frontal and assertive, challenging pose in which Henry was usually painted. So Holbein is again following orders as he paints these pictures. Now, whether you think that shows an expression of the child, it's sort of hard to tell. I think in this case, he just paints a pretty straightforward picture of what a little boy might look like. Edward VI's reign was characterized by popular discontent. He becomes King of England at the age of 16 when his father dies. And the introduction of Protestantism into England. As the only son of Henry VIII, by his third wife, Jane Seymour, as I said, he succeeds to the throne in 1547. Always a sickly child, he probably dies from tuberculosis in 1553. Very short reign, and of course he is followed by his famous sister Elizabeth. And it suggests that despite his young age, he will be a worthy successor. What? He'll be a worthy successor, reassuring viewers that the future of the Tudor dynasty is secure. So here he is, Holbein has been told to sort of paint him as a capable, competent little boy, which of course he isn't. Here's a sad picture. I just wanted to show you this portrait of Holbein's wife, who we don't know much about. We don't know much about his private life at all. He does have his wife, Elspeth Bisenstock, 2 of their 4 children. She was married before she married him. They had a couple of other children. He paints it during his stay in Basel after his return from England. It was painted between 1528 and 1529. It's not a happy picture. You can certainly tell that. The family is shown in modest clothing, which is in stark contrast to the riches Holbein brings back to Basel from England. Apart from one brief visit, Holbein has lived apart from Elspeth since 1532. Yet when she dies in 1549, she was well off and still owned many of his fine clothes. On the other hand, she sold his portrait before his death. Yeah, he painted his portrait and gave this to her, but it was not a happy marriage. He was totally consumed with his life in England at this point. Now I'm going to show you the last series here. His greatest painting, certainly his best known painting, is called The Ambassadors, 1533. I think I even talked about this once before in an earlier class I did. In addition to being a double portrait, the painting contains a still life of meticulously rendered objects, the meaning of which is still the cause of debate. An array of expensive scientific objects in here, lower and upper right here, related to man's knowledge of the cosmos are prominently displayed. So let's break this down a little bit here. Among the clues of figures' assertions are a selection of these scientific instruments, including 2 globes, one terrestrial and there's 2 globes, one down here, terrestrial, and one celestial up here. This is sort of a commentary on the life of, it's a brilliant picture. not so much as a portrait as sort of what was going on at the time. The floor mosaic is based on a design from Westminster Abbey right here. I mean, all sorts of little things, and actually, it was found later not to be from Westminster Abbey. Of course, there's this famous skull, which we'll look at in a few minutes, right in here. Okay, let's move on here now. The two figures. It's a portrait of these two men, John de Donville, and the French ambassador to England on the left, and his friend and fellow diplomatic and scholar George de Selve is on the right, holding a pair of gloves. So it's a portrait. It's interesting that de Donville is in England. The French are very anxious to see what's going to go on in England at this point with the breaking away from the Catholic Church and the beginning of Anglicanism. And so he's there for a reason, and this is his very good friend. George de Selve is a good friend, but a totally different background in terms of what his career is about. The painting tells their ages somewhere in the picture. Holbein has listed the age on the subjects. You can read on his dagger here, which you'll see in a minute. They were quite young. They were both in their 20s at that point, being sent on this important mission to England to try to keep affairs from England and France disintegrating. The painting contains overtones of religious strife. The conflicts between the secular and the religious authorities are here represented by these two men. In line with the work's other dualities, the two figures' personalities contrast. Donville appears as a man of action, clutching a dagger, and the other man simply rests his arm on a book right over here, suggesting his contemplative nature. Both the dagger and his belt and the book are inscribed in Latin with their ages: 29 de Donville and 25 for Selve. The two shelves of the table serve to contrast the terrestrial, as I said, and the celestial right here. Terrestrial, everything up here is in the celestial up here, everything down here is earthbound. The lower shelf, including this terrestrial, the terrestrial globe, the celestial realm with the astronomical instruments on the upper shelf, including the celestial globe up here. Similarly, you can divide the picture vertically between the two men, and the two sort of are very opposites in terms of one being the more worldly figure, and this is a man, of course, of the church here. It symbolizes the fleeting nature of earthly achievements and power. That's what the skull's going to do when we get to that. Suggests against a backdrop of political and religious discords. There's a lot of, there's a great deal of turmoil at this particular point. These are things that are dividing Europe during this period. It incorporates one of the best known examples of anamorphosis at the bottom, the skull. While most scholars have taken the view that the painting should be viewed from the side to see the skull, others believe that a glass tube was used to see the skull head on. Either way, death is prominent and obscured until discovered. Does anybody see the carving of the crucifix of Jesus in this picture? Anybody see it? Look carefully. It's a crucifix picture of Jesus up in this picture. You can barely see it. I can't make it any larger than that. That's put in there. Holbein tucks in all sorts of little symbols and little points of significance here. Okay. Sorry, what? In upper left, yeah. It's just let's see that again. It's right way up in here, and he puts it way up. Upper left, can you see it too? It's not supposed to be that easily to see. I mean, it's just right up in there. Okay. Okay, here's another one. The detail of the globe, the lute, and books on the lower shelf. Okay, now there's the globe. Anybody notice anything about the globe? It's upside down. It's the significance of the world, at least at this way, the way Holbein sees it. The world's turned upside down. Here's Europe, right in here. And apparently, I can't see it here, but Tenteville's estate is marked in this area right in here in eastern France, right there. The Treaty of Tordesillas is also put in here, which is a treaty, this red line that runs across, you can see it here, which divides the world between Spain and Portugal. Remember that was an old Treaty of Tordesillas was sort of, you can barely see it. So he's worked in a number of different things. He's put a lute in. There's a broken string on the lute. You can see it right there, right in here. And it's a sort of a weird looking lute with the end sort of bent off, broken off. He's put a hymnal, a Lutheran church hymnal right here, sort of, which you're the one that caused all this trouble. There's a lot of fraction, there's a great deal of discontent. So this picture is very symbolic of the state of the world in the early part of the 16th century. The globe, the hymnal, the book. Here's another book down here. I think it's a math book right here. The scientific revolution isn't that far away here either. So that's that. Then the dagger in the arithmetic book. Daggers were common symbols of authority. And that's why Tenteville is carrying this dagger in his hand. And again, he's a man of authority compared to the priest on the other side of the picture. The dagger contrasts with Tenteville's clerical attire. With his, it should be de Silva's clerical attire. An arithmetic book shows the arithmetic book down here on the bottom shelf right here of Peter Appian. Peter Appian was a German humanist known for his works in mathematics, astronomy, and cartography. So as I said, this is sort of portends the coming of the scientific revolution, which in many ways has actually begun by then. A page from the Lutheran hymnal. I said this little book changed the world. The church continues to sing her hymns from this to this day. The little hymn book is tucked on a bottom shelf between two wealthy and respected men whom nobody remembers, but they remember the little hymnal. The hymns of this book persist because they are spring from the conviction of the faith that holds tenaciously to the Word of God. Diplomats and ambassadors will come and go, but a good hymn will last as long as the world does. Terrestrial and celestial globes. And I guess this is the one that shows a better view right here. Here is the Treaty of Tordesillas, this red line which goes around and cuts up. It cuts, mostly what it does is to cut Brazil off from the rest of South America, which is why Brazil is Portuguese and the rest of South America originally was Spanish. And here's the celestial globe. The terrestrial is positioned upside down. We've talked about the significance of that. Because of the tumult of the times. This was the clue that led to the identification of these two figures in this picture in the first place. The fact that we could see the chateau of Polsey, the family home of de Tenteville. The celestial globe on the upper shelf is a tool that helps us make sense of the heavens and the nature of human existence as it was seen in the 16th century. And we can see everything shows a sort of transience of life, along with other instruments for understanding the heavens and measuring time. Left, the carpet on the upper shelf is on the right here in this shelf, well, where there two men are resting here, is an example of a Holbein carpet, an Anatolian carpet often depicted on the author's other paintings on the right. And here's the flooring underneath, which is supposed to be Westminster Abbey, but it apparently really isn't. So why is there a carpet in Holbein's paintings? The carpet is a luxury object meant to elevate the two men's status. It also reminds us of the power and prestige of the Ottoman Empire at that time.
Question about the hand on the left-hand side there, that it's way distorted, the length of the fingers.
Yeah, it's distorted, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's not, let's see if it shows that in one of his other paintings. I'm just looking to see if it shows it, if it's that noticeable. It's not quite as noticeable as this, that's a really close-up. I would say, but no, even this is fairly noticeable. That's interesting. These are instruments, celestial instruments on the top shelf. The shepherd's dial, these all measure men live in an age of great discovery at this point. The left-hand one is called a pillar dial, simple device designed to be carried as it calculates the time according to the position of the sun's shadow. Please don't ask me how it works, but that's the description of it. The painting on the right shows a plumb line on the left of that device and two scales for adjusting the device for a particular latitude, so it's more for navigation purposes, this one over here. Navigation purposes, again, I couldn't possibly tell you how it works, but the scientific revolution, it shows that the scientific revolution is a strong influence on Holbein. Here's two others, the torquentum and the polyhedral dial, sundials. The torquentum is known from medieval descriptions as possibly Arabic in origin. There's dispute over its usage. It was probably used for planetary observation to help find the location of a planet or verify information. It appears to was used in this period 1450 to the 1500s to locate Halley's Comet. The polyhedral sundial is most a remarkable dials. It is displayed with three sides clearly in view, with the shadows pointing to the way the dials, depending on the location of the sun, what time of day it would be. These are used by mariners, by sailors, most of the time, because they get off and they, of course, they didn't know where they were. Okay, lastly, the skull. Reminder that death is inevitable for all, obscuring the worldly wealth and status displayed in the painting. That's what's so significant about this, making it omnipresent. His life comes between the end of the Renaissance, as I said, and the beginning of the scientific revolution. Let me just play you a very short clip of this. Here we go. If I can find this. Why am I not getting this in? Here. No, that's the point. Here we go. Death comes to us all. So you're moving to the left. That's the way you're supposed to view it.
What museum is that in? Wax Museum?
I knew it. That's a good question. Okay, let me go on to the last. Okay, and that's it. Next week, Peter Bruegel, the elder, and his sons. All right, thank you. Are there any quick, short questions? They're almost out, but anybody like to ask a question? Yes.
How big is that master's painting?
How big is it? It takes up a good deal of the skull, you mean?
No, the whole painting. How big is the painting?
It's a 3/4 of a wall. I mean, it's a big painting. So he's got all these things that are worked in there. It's amazing, amazing painting, really. I'm trying to think where it was. Joan? Yeah.
I'm wondering when did oil paint become the medium of choice? When did they switch from tempera to oil?
Anybody know the answer to that question? When did oil painting become more popular? I think it's at least another couple hundred years. I'd have to look that up.
Jan Van Eyck used
He did, okay,
Oh,
And so did Roger Vanderbilt and the whole Northern Renaissance.
all right, well, then that,
In the late, oil and tempera were used contemporaneously in the late 15th century in the Flemish painting, Northern Renaissance
Yeah.
painting. So Holbein probably could have used both. But those, I think, would have been oil.
this, you think this was oil? This one?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you could do that in tempera,
Yeah.
that size.
I have to take your word for it. Okay, well, anyway, thank you all for coming.